Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get started with our session. This is a morning session for me here in Canada, but I understand it's an evening session for many others in Europe and other places. Merritt and I are going to be showing a video that captures a couple videos that capture the process of us looking at moving from the text of a recipe into the actual practice of making the recipe. And before I do that, I wanted to briefly introduce myself, and we will have a couple housekeeping points to go over just before the videos get started. My name is Ryan Whibbs, and I'm the academic chairperson of the Manitoba Institute of Culinary Arts, which is at Assiniboine Community College in Brandon, Manitoba, Canada. I'm a chef by trade, but I'm also a food historian by training. And I mostly focus on great households and culinary guilds and the relationships between great households and culinary guilds. But this didn't help me with the recipes today. And I'm going to introduce Merritt, my colleague who has also taken up this challenge with myself. Merritt will introduce herself and let us know a little bit about her background.
Yes, hi everyone. So my name is Merritt, and I'm an archaeobotanist by trade, and I love to cook. But that also did not help me create these two recipes to replicate them. I did not know what I was doing, and this was very informative for me because it helped me better understand the implicit knowledge that the cooks in the past had. I had a lot of questions. I often wanted to just pause my recording just to look it up or call someone. I didn't. So in the videos, you'll see the interesting outcome. And we would love to discuss with you the steps we took or how other people might recreate a recipe to get a better understanding of cookery practices and how different they might be, because everyone has their own view when reading and recreating a recipe. Yes, so back to Ryan for the rest of the session introduction.
Thank you very much, Merritt. Before we get too far into the session, I would like to introduce our wonderful moderator, Julia, and she'll tell us a little bit about how the questions will work.
Thank you. Good evening or good morning for me as well. I will be your Q&A moderator for the session today. As many of you already know, there is your Q&A button down below. You can pop in any questions you have at any point, at any time during the video. And we ask you to just write them down. And after we have watched the video together, you can, your questions will be answered by the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. So now it's over to the videos and what Merritt and I were actually working on. And to give a little bit of background before we begin watching the videos, Merritt and myself were discussing this conference, and we did notice the live or the demonstration sessions, and we thought it would be really interesting to try to recreate recipes that we have never seen before. So when we created these videos, we weren't creating them to try to teach people how to make these sauces, because actually we didn't know how to make them either when we started. We only had the text and our different experiences. And we thought that that would be very interesting because in the Middle Ages, it's not necessarily a given that there would be a trained cook around to interpret these recipes. So there is the text of the recipe, and then as Merit said, there are implicit steps that that different cooks would have navigated differently, and that the outcomes of these recipes often were different. And part of the inspiration for this approach comes from actually the difficulty of dealing with medieval recipes. I think a lot of us who have been working in food history know that there is some uncertainty or some reluctance or just in general uncertainty about what the outcome of recipes will actually be. And that this kind of prevents us from experiencing the food of the Middle Ages in an authentic or certain way. I think what Merit and I were thinking, and I don't want to speak too much for Merit, but for myself, I have noticed in my work as a culinary instructor that if we have 20 students in a class and they have a modern recipe with full measurements and a full method, at the end of the class, I still get 20 different recipes. And I thought that it might be good to kind of celebrate this diversity that actually does exist in cooking and maybe embrace it as well. So Christoph, if you would like to cue up the first movie video. It's not as exciting as a movie, just a video. And it will show the recipe at the beginning, both recipes that we looked at, and then it will kind of walk you through the methods. The recipes and the source are the last thing that I did want to mention. The source is one that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. It's the British Library's Harley manuscript 4016, dated to about 1450. It is part of the two 15th century manuscripts that was published in, I believe, the late 19th century by Thomas Austin. I did take that recipe and check it against the digitized manuscript at the British Library, and it is a faithful reproduction or transcription of the text. So we were working from the original medieval words. The two sauces are sauce cameline and sauce Sermstelle. Cameline was a universal sauce across medieval Europe. It could often be bought in shops. The Ménagier de Paris mentions that you could buy cameline at shops and instead of actually having to make it yourself. It was used on meat mostly, and so it is kind of a piquant, wine-based, vinegar-based sauce. Sermstelle is a, I wouldn't say a cream sauce, it's a thickened milk sauce. It seems to be a medieval answer to bechamel before they were using roux. Today we would use a roux, so equal parts of fat and flour cooked. In the Middle Ages, in sauce Sermstelle, they would actually put the flour directly into the liquid. They wouldn't use a roux. So the thickening and the outcome of these sauces were something that I wasn't sure exactly how to navigate. I think Merit found a similar thing as well. And Merit and I did not speak before we made these sauces. We did not see each other's videos. We did not compare notes. When it was time to actually go and make the sauces, it was radio silence on both ends. We did our own interpretations, And this discussion will actually be our first opportunity to discuss the videos at any length. So with that in mind, I believe it would be a good time to begin watching the videos. Hello everyone, and welcome to this video where we are making two medieval sauces. The first sauce is cameline, and I'm actually working on that right now. The recipe calls for cinnamon, ground cinnamon, and I didn't have ground cinnamon. I only had sticks. So I decided to simmer the sticks with the wine. Then I'll take the sticks out so that we have the cinnamon flavor, but we get around the issue of not having cinnamon powder. Okay, I have steeped the wine in with the cinnamon, and the sticks are just opening up a bit now. I can smell that it's very fragrant. The vinegar isn't in here. So the wine was just in here to steep with the cinnamon. Then I'll continue on with the recipe. And again, this was just because I didn't have cinnamon powder. So the recipe says, and this is for cameline, take fair bread, cut it, so I've done that, and take vinegar and wine, so I've got my wine. I chose white wine vinegar, and it says to steep the bread therein and draw it through a strainer with powder of cinnamon, which I've got the cinnamon flavor in here now. Draw it twice or thrice till it be smooth. And then take powder of ginger, sugar, and powdered cloves. So I've got ginger, sugar, and instead of cloves, I have mace. I didn't have ground cloves here. Mace is the lining of the clove. It's just a slightly more intense flavor than clove. And saffron as well. And the last line says, and cast thereto a little saffron, and let it be thick enough, and then serve forth. So there are no measurements. I do have my wine here. It's wine that tastes like cinnamon now. And I'll add vinegar, probably about 1/3 of the amount of wine that I have. It's just there to give it some more extra bite. And now the next thing that I want to do is decide on the amount of bread that I want to steep. And I had 3 slices here. I just took the crusts off and diced them into squares. So I'll put these squares into here and just let them start to steep. I'm not going to add I won't add all of it. I'll probably only add about 1.5 pieces of bread. So the bread is in there now, and it's steeping, and it just needs to, in my opinion, sit for a while, and then we can start straining it. So the wine was warm because I steeped the cinnamon in it, and then we'll just let it stay there as is. Okay, so the wine has steeped with the vinegar and wine and bread have steeped. They've sat for about 10 minutes now. I'm going to strain them. I chose this, we call it a chinois or a strainer, because it's not as fine as some of them. I think that holes like this would easily be possible in the medieval period, so a strainer with this type of fineness is probably something that they had. I could put cheesecloth in here because the recipe clearly wants it to be homogeneous. So today, if I was doing that, I would put cheesecloth in to help strain out any particles. Doesn't mention that here. I don't know if they had it, so I won't be doing that. Just going to strain it into my pot, and because I have to do it a few times, I'll keep these pots around, and I'm just pushing the bread through the strainer. And then the chunkiest parts at the bottom, I'll just rinse out once they've gone through, or as much as possible. This is part of the thickening of the sauce, so I want to keep as much as passed through the strainer. Okay. So we have our bread strained. It says 2 or 3 times, so I'm gonna put it through 2 or 3 times. It does look a little finer, so certainly the bread has broken down more at this point. Okay, so our sauce is now has the bread in it. And I'm actually going to add the seasonings. So again, it calls for ginger, mace, sugar, and at the end, saffron. So we'll add that right now. Just a tiny bit, but enough that it can be tasted above the acids in the sauce. Sugar. This is mace, or we're using it in place of nutmeg today. And a little bit of saffron. The reason I chose red wine is because we are adding saffron, and I thought it would just be nice to intensify the color of the sauce as opposed to kind of wash it out with white wine. So just add a couple sprigs of saffron. Now the next step that I'm going to do is, because this starch is in here, I am going to return this to the heat and let it come to a boil. And because the starch is in here, that should thicken the sauce. But we'll have to see. The sauce is very homogeneous right now, so it is the 3 strains did do well with it. I'll just let this come to a boil. This next sauce that I'm making is the name of it is sauce Sermstelle or Guancel. It uses, and this is from the 2 15th century cookbooks, so this version uses milk, flour, garlic, pepper, and salt. So milk, flour, garlic, pepper, and salt. And the recipe says, take milk and a little flour and cast it in a pot and let it boil together all thin. And when it is well boiled, take and stamp garlic small and cast thereto powder of pepper and salt, and then serve forth. So I will start to get this ready. Okay, so for this sauce, I'll start the milk. So I also need to get the other ingredients. It shouldn't be too difficult. And just for ease, I'll put them in the order that I use them. So pepper, the salt is around, garlic, and flour. Okay, so I'm back with all my ingredients, salt in hand. We've got our milk in here. The next step is to prepare the flour. So the recipe does say, take milk and a little flour and cast into a pot and let boil all together, all thin. I have about 300 milliliters of milk in there. So this might be a bit too much flour, but I'm gonna start with this amount of flour. And instead of adding it exactly as the recipe says, I'm gonna do it more like a cornstarch slurry. So I'll mix the milk and sugar into a thick paste so that it doesn't turn into balls when I add it, hopefully. If I was really concerned about that, I could have sifted the flour, but I'm just rubbing it against the side of the bowl to get rid of any lumps. Okay, so this milk is not hot right now. I'm afraid if it was hot, this would just cook the second I pour it in, and we'd have a poached roux type thing. Okay, so I'll just really scrape all of this out. So now we've got the flour in here without turning into balls. I'll
turn on the heat, and now that I've got flour in here, I'm gonna have to babysit this and be sure it doesn't burn. Okay, our sauce is just about to boil. So that means the flour is being activated. I'm just gonna whisk it a little. There's no lumps or anything, but just to be sure that there's no clumping or anything like that as it cooks. And it's always hard to boil milk. The recipe says when it is well boiled. So once it comes to a boil, it wants me to leave it at least at a simmer for a while. So I will do as it asks, but it is difficult without burning. Okay, our sauce has been simmering for a little bit now. I'm going to turn it down even more. I would say it's time to add our seasonings. That was our salt, black pepper. I could use white pepper. I mean, chefs today would probably use white pepper, but not sure if they had it. I have a feeling they probably didn't. So salt, pepper, and garlic have all gone in now. That was raw garlic, and it is supposed to go in after it has boiled well together. So that's what we have done, and I believe this sauce is it. So I'll show both sauces now on chicken, which I got. Okay, so this is our first sauce, and this is cameline. Now the cameline has sat for about 7 minutes or so since cooking, and we'll just see the consistency is certainly saucy. And it's similar, it's actually very similar consistency to sauces that we would use nowadays. So that's interesting. And I'll just pour it over our chicken here. So you can see with the chicken, the sauce is just over the front of it. It's holding its position pretty well. It's certainly quite acidic when I tasted it earlier, but I'll taste it with a piece of chicken now. Let's see what we think. It actually tastes really good with meat. The wine tastes good. It's a bit clumpy. I mean, I don't think you'll ever get rid of the pieces of bread, and certainly cuisine today, we don't like to see things floating in sauce like that. But it tastes really good. I mean, this is sauce pre-roux. So they got the starch in by steeping bread in the liquid. I think it works pretty well and tastes quite nice. And so now I'll put the sauce on the other one. Okay, and so this is our second sauce. The first one was cameline. This last one is Sermstelle or Guancel. So this is the milk sauce that has flour in it, garlic, salt, and pepper. And those are the only ingredients in this sauce. Just gonna whisk it again because it's been about 7-8 minutes since it came off the stove. Now the consistency here is very interesting. It's not unlike a thin bechamel. The garlic certainly smells strong. I don't think we're used to garlic in a cream sauce like this. And I'll just put it over the chicken. So, there's our chicken, and I'll just give a close-up here. The sauce is certainly quite thick, surprisingly thick, actually. And I'll taste it, just see what we think. It's an interesting flavor. Milk is already kind of sweet, and the garlic, even with the salt and pepper, tastes a little strange, actually. It's good, and it's an interesting sauce. It's amazing how close to bechamel this sauce is without having roux, and it's really quite fine. You know, there's no lumps or anything. So it's interesting. It does have a bit of a floury flavor. The more you cook flour, the less thickening power it has, and the more chance you have of separating the milk. But at the same time, the less you cook it, the more chance you have of raw flour flavor. So this is an interesting one. I think it's very interesting to explore cuisine and especially sauces before they had roux, and especially to see what Merit makes. You know, my sauces, Merit may have chosen white wine, I chose red wine. Merit may have figured out some other way of getting the flour into the sauce. So this does only illustrate my approach, and I do think that medieval cooks did have my own approach, this kind of idea of knowing how to do something and adding their own twists and turns. So that uniqueness, I think, and when we compare my sauce and Merit's sauce, I do think that variance is part of the nature of medieval cuisine, and that even though the sauces don't have measurements per se, that variation is part of the nature of medieval cuisine. So this was a very interesting exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph, for your excellent video control skills there. So that's the first video. And Merit will now be showing her videos, which are the exact same recipes made at her home. So Merit, if you'd like to introduce your videos.
Yes, thank you, Ryan. So after viewing Ryan's culinary skills and his recreation of the sauces, I was just thinking that I completely had a different approach, as you'll see in a few moments when Christoph starts the videos. So I am in my kitchen and well, trying my best, because normally I don't make the sauces at home. My boyfriend does. I had sent him away because I didn't want anyone looking over my shoulder and telling me what to do. But as you'll see in a bit, actually I was quite looking forward to somebody in the kitchen telling me what to do, because I had no clue. So my sauces are completely different. And I would be very interested in the feedback or the Q&A and the discussion that will commence afterwards, because for me this was very interesting and a very useful experience. I don't think, well, my approach was different. One sauce might be wrong. We'll judge afterwards. Yeah, so the idea that every cook interprets the recipe differently, well, you can see that in a moment when Christoph starts the first sauce. Hi everyone, and welcome in my kitchen, a small part of it. So Ryan and I will be trying to recreate historical recipes from scratch. I am an archaeobotanist, not an experienced chef. I'm not a medievalist or early modern historian, but I do love to cook, and I do love to better get an understanding of where my archaeobotanical material comes from. So I do experiment a bit with historical recipes, mostly early modern, so 17th, 18th century. But this medieval recipe is picked by Ryan, and I have no idea how to make it. So it's a sauce gemeline. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but so I will read the recipe and then start cooking the sauce, creating the sauce, and let you see what I am doing. So in a moment I will turn my screen and you will mostly see my hands and me contemplating if I'm doing everything according to plan. So first, take fair bread and cut it. Take vinegar and wine, step the bread therein and draw it through a strainer with powder of cannel and draw it twice or thrice till it be smooth. And then take powder of ginger, sugar, powder of cloves, and cast thereto a little saffron and let it be thick enough, and then serve it forth. So I see that there is no mention of boiling or heating ingredients, so I assume it's a cold sauce. I have no experience with that. Yeah, let's see what I will be doing. So I will just tilt my screen so you can see I've managed to get all the ingredients. So I have my vinegar. I have white wine vinegar or apple vinegar because I know they had both, and it just says vinegar. I also have normal vinegar, but I thought I'd add a taste. Wine, ginger, cinnamon, sugar, saffron. Wait, let's see. This is from my colleague from Iran, so it's very good saffron. And powdered cloves. And I have my bread and a bowl for mixing. So let's start. Take the bread and cut it. It does not say remove the crust, so I won't, because that will be a waste, I assume. So I'm cutting my bread. I have 3 slices of just fair bread, white bread, assuming that that will be the type of bread they used for this sauce. So cut it. That's a lot of bread, actually. So I will need quite an amount of vinegar and wine. So steep the bread in it. So I have Sauvignon Blanc, because that is what I had in my cupboard. It's dry, soft, with the fresh taste of apple. So perhaps I should also add apple vinegar, or that would be too appley. So I'm going to steep my bread in it. I have no idea about the amount of vinegar. So this is just plain white wine vinegar. I think I would prefer less vinegar, more wine. But who am I? I have no idea. Okay, so steep the bread in it. It's not completely steeped. I don't know if it has to be submerged or soaked or whatever. So it's nice and soggy. It has absorbed all the moisture. And draw it through a strainer with cinnamon powder. Getting my strainer. I'm going to get another mixing bowl because it has to go somewhere. Ta-da! So, let's just with powdered cinnamon. So I like cinnamon, but it's very pungent. Assuming that you can always add more to taste, even though it doesn't say so. Okay. That does smell very nice already. Just adding a bit more cinnamon. Because I can. For any of you who have already tried this sauce, I have no idea if I'm doing it correctly. So this would be a very interesting one to discuss after the video. And I'm also really curious to know what Ryan has done as the professional chef. Okay, draw it through a strainer. Assuming to just, how do you press this through a strainer? How do you do that? Okay, so now I am totally at loss here. Ooh, I mean, this does not go through a strainer. Actually, it just, well, wait, let's try again. Normally now I would just Google it or get a cookbook, call someone. Yeah, I would like a helpline. Okay. You strain it twice or thrice until it is smooth. Let's see. Nothing comes through. Do I have to soak it more? Okay. Yeah, I'm completely at loss here now. So I will just soak it more. A bit more wine and vinegar, of course. Because I could understand that you just need to get the liquid out. Just use the mushy bread. This is very frustrating for me, not knowing what to do. Also, I've never seen this type of sauce, so I really have to try not to press pause to just check what other people have done when trying to recreate this. Because I know there have been historians or cooks or culinary historians that have made such a sauce. Okay, So again, strain it. Okay, now some liquid comes out, but I assume that it's not the liquid that I need for the sauce, but the bread. This is so frustrating. I'm actually thinking of just quitting because when I think of a sauce, it just is some liquid form that you pour over a piece of meat or fish or vegetables even, fowl. This is not that. So it is more, it's still not smooth, but it's smoother. So how can you strain it twice or thrice? Just, okay, anyway. I'm just going to call this a fail already, because I do not know what I'm doing. But on the bright side, there is some liquid that I've pushed out. On what to do with that. I can try and press it just. How do they do it? So now it's really moist. So that could work. Okay, so I've pushed it through the strainer, not twice or thrice because I do not know how to do that. And then I need to add powdered ginger. So let me get a fresh spoon. Powdered ginger, powdered cloves, not too much because that's really like aromatic. Sugar, because why not? And normally I would say that you just soak your saffron in warm water. Oh, this is nice. I have no idea what a little is, but let me just put that there. Yeah, to use hot water or not? Yes, I will. Boil some water, which goes fairly easy because I have a kettle. So I have 4 strands of saffron. Which I will just heat up in my little saucer. Oh, the pretty color. So not trying to go. You can see sort of that it turns a lovely shade of yellow. Oh, and it smells nice. Okay, still no idea how to do this, because it next says, well, let it be thick enough. Smooth and thick. Well, that will work. And then I have to serve it. Oh, this is so nice. So, adding all of this loveliness through my soaked bread, which mostly just smells of vinegar and wine, unfortunately. Yeah, so I'm going to add more powdered ginger, a bit more sugar, more cinnamon, because why not? I think I'm holding off on the cloves. Of course, I'd have to try, because it might taste really different than it smells. I assume this is thick enough. I have no idea what thick enough means. It is sort of smooth. Because if I have to use the residue like this, it's not at all what I consider a sauce. It's just soaked bread, but hey, who am I? If I use the liquid, I would definitely use less vinegar because it's very pungent. So the taste is interesting. Still leaking a bit of liquids. Let me show you. Yeah, no idea what I would have been making. So I assume this is a result. Please give me all the feedback in the comments or in the discussion, because perhaps this is just it. I like the ginger and the cinnamon. Saffron is not present. Cloves are, just vaguely, which I like. Oh well. Let me just serve it on a plate. Ta-da! No. Still does taste okay. So that's something. So as you can see, that was completely different from what Ryan produced. And after watching his video, I thought that explains a lot. I just need to soak my bread for some time before pushing it through a strainer. So we have one sauce left, the sauce Sermstelle, which was a sauce that I am more proud of, because that sort of turned out to be an actual sauce, or at least what I think is a sauce. So Christoph has the video for that one too, and he'll show it to you. And afterwards we can, discuss via Q&A what you think of our productions, creations, how you might have interpreted it differently, or if both our visions are perfectly acceptable. We'd love to hear from you, so please leave a comment or question in the Q&A, and then bear with me for a second recipe. So let's see how we're doing this. As it said, the recipe is very basic, no measurements, as many of us know who have read or recreated historical dishes. So first let me take milk and a little flour And to be honest, I have no idea how little a little flour is, and cast it into a pot. Okay, so I will again let you see what I'm doing. So I have my milk and my pot. It does not say sieve the flour, but I will. I don't want lumps. So I'll just take, you can always add more, so I will just take 1, 2 tablespoons of flour. So already I am not following the recipe precisely because I'm sieving the flour, but because I do not know what I'm doing, it doesn't hurt, I assume. My whisk. Okay, so I take and stamp garlic small. Okay. Just cut it up. Like this. Pound it, stamp it. Small. My milk is already heating up. Apparently you have to keep stirring because it's already getting lumpy. And I know for a fact that you have to make sure that the milk boils to cook the flour, because you do not want raw flour. No one told me to keep stirring, so I'm doing that. I hope I can still, let's say, get it all mixed together. Otherwise, this first try of the sauce is not going well. Normally, it takes some time for milk to boil, but apparently if you add flour, it goes very quickly. It has to be thin. Okay, I'll add some pepper, corns. I could have ground this beforehand. Probably, it says already ground powdered pepper, not ground. So perhaps everything is going all wrong. I will also add some salt. Do not forget to stir my sauce because it has lumps again. But it's getting thicker, but it has to be thin. So I have no idea what consistency it has to be. But it does smell nice. It's starting to smell like porridge. So no idea how long this will take. So whilst cooking, I hope you're making notes because I'm questioning what I'm doing here. It says, let it boil together all thin, but when you boil it, it becomes thicker. So when is it thin and when does it start to get thick, and what is too thick? I like my sauce to be a bit thick. I want it to be draped all over a piece of meat and then just have like a coating. So a bit of thickness would be okay. I wish it had said to taste, because then I could say, well, this is my taste and it didn't fail. It's not lumpy anymore, well, ish. Ish. Still nice and white. Just grind a bit more. It also doesn't say what to serve it with. So again, I assume everything goes well with fish. Starting to boil. I think it's a good consistency. I have no idea if it's boiled properly, well boiled. Just going to take a leap and add my garlic and my pepper and my salt, which is not yet finely pounded, but still. Because now it's not tasting of anything, I assume. How do you get lumps out of your sauce? Just by stirring? Let's add my, but still a bit of pepper. No, it's not anymore. Let's see how this turns out. So I've powdered my pepper and salt. Garlic. Let's see what happens. So now you see some heat coming off still, but it's flaky. Not smell that much garlic yet. I think perhaps I need more. Oh, yes, I can taste the pepper. I will add some salt. So my sauce is thicker now. But let's say thin is just a suggestion. It now smells pleasantly of sort of porridge and garlic. I really get the feeling that I should strain it, just in case there are lumps of garlic. And of course, it doesn't have to be a smooth sauce. There would have been a word for that, I assume. Otherwise, I would have powdered garlic and stuff. It just smells like sauce. So. So this was my first attempt. Ooh, this is the sauce. It tastes nice. It's thick and creamy, even though, well, there's only milk. Next time, less pepper, 2.5 parts of garlic, and keep on stirring all the time just to make sure that it doesn't lump. So that was our experimental recreation of 2 medieval sauces. As you can see, different, even though we had the same basic recipe to start with. And a very nice experience.
Yes, I completely agree, Merritt. It was a really fascinating thing to see both of us work through side by side, even for myself. And I think we'll have Julia controlling the questions now.
Yes, thank you. Already have comments in the Q&A by Beatrice Vignon. She says, good morning, evening here. The Camelina sauce shouldn't be thicker. It seems to me that it was served in cups in which the guests dipped their meat. Also more practical if thicker, maybe. Do you use beet or cane sugar? Anyway, good job, thank you. Also, she says, what's interesting, both of you use breadcrumb. When in France, we use baker's bread, but she corrected, I make a mistake. I don't know how to translate pain de mie.
So I used cane sugar, just because that's what I have in my cupboard and it's easily accessible. Well, as you see, my sauce was completely different from Ryan's. So mine would be very thick, very useful to stick to the meat or fish or poultry or whatever you used it for. And yeah, I used store-bought loaves, just plain white bread, and just cut it up. But it was fresh-ish. It was bought 2 days before, and I can understand that you would use older bread because that crumbs more easily and it's more easy to add to a sauce. And I think Ryan would have some ideas about that too.
It's actually fascinating that a few of the questions here, the running theme is the thickening method. And that was actually what I struggled with the most, thinking about the sauces was, you know, based on these ingredients, what do I have to do to both thicken it and have the right consistency and the right flavor, and not over thicken, because, you know, I didn't want to have to add liquid after or kind of dilute the flavors that were there. And I think by baker's bread, Beatrice means like maybe just kind of a loaf, like an artisanal or a sourdough or something type of loaf. And it is true, I did use white bread. I chose white bread because, of course, there's all kinds of additives in bread today, but the white fine bread is, or manchet, is the bread that is most closely associated with great household tradition. That kind of bread that's free of grain particles and very white in color. And through my own training, I have found that there are sauces thickened with bread, but they're very old. I worked under a British chef early in my apprenticeship, and he taught me a bread sauce, and I thought it was the strangest thing I've ever seen. I had no idea where it came from, and when I started becoming a food historian, I learned that actually somehow he was in touch with people who have kept this bread tradition alive, and when I met him, he taught me. So I did know about cutting the cross off. The proportion is a total guessing game. I really had no idea. And also I knew that the bread would be strained. So I actually didn't really need it in crumb form because it would get steeped in the liquid and then pressed through the strainer anyway. So I just cut it into little squares and then let them dissolve and then broke the rest of it up as I pushed it through the sieve. But that was definitely the major thing that was on my mind for both sauces was how thick will they be? And maybe for medieval chefs, I'm sure there was probably maybe some variation there from one sauce maker to another.
Cécile Chevalier's question goes into a similar direction. She says, congrats to you both. It's surprising to see differences in similar recipes. It seems that this morning's Ménage de Paris cameline was quite thick and used toasted bread, explicitly mentioned as far as I remember. While both Merit and Ryan used fresh bread, Ryan seems much more liquid than Fabienne's cameline. Maybe is it due to the different kinds of bread we eat in our countries? Ryan also used maize, or nutmeg like Fabienne, but Merit used cloves as mentioned in the Bill's recipe. Maybe the recipes have been adapted from one another with a mistaken translation between.
I can answer the last question. It was not a mistaken translation. It was a mistake when I was standing in front of the spice rack that day. I just didn't catch it at the time. But when I noticed it after, I thought, you know, medieval chefs would have used what was around, and there probably were camelines that didn't have clove but did have mace or nutmeg or vice versa, even verjuice. I was a little surprised that these sauces don't call for verjuice, even though they call for half wine or cameline calls for half wine and or a mixture of wine and vinegar. So yeah, there were kind of some interesting decisions along the way, but the spice was just a simple mistake. The thickness of the sauce, I'm not aware of a source that really does describe in too much detail the thickness of medieval sauces. There are sources that talk about dips, and I did kind of have that in mind, that medieval sauces may have been a bit thinner than what we're used to today. And there's also that other thing here in North America. We have gravy, and it's this brown instant sauce, and we use it on everything. And it's kind of caused people to think that a sauce should be as thick as the really thick gravy that we get. And so I was kind of working more from the more classical version of how thick a sauce should be, and trying to keep the use of it, where you nappe it over a piece of meat, in mind, but also have something that could be kind of dipped if possible. I don't think Sermstelle was dipped, so that one I felt more confident to make slightly thicker, so that it can be napped over meat.
Helmut also has a question.
I would like to add that I think also that the thickness of a sauce is just, well, depending on what you like, or if you're a cook, what your employer likes. So as I mentioned, when thinking about sauces, I like them being quite, well, not really thick, but at least thick enough to actually coat your piece of meat or fish or poultry. So unless it says runny thin or something like that, then you know what you're actually aiming at. So it's very up to your own interpretation, I think.
That certainly is true. I will continue with the questions in the Q&A. We have one from Eisen Tanyari Apur. Thank you for the very interesting demonstrations and congratulations to both of you. Beyond cookery knowledge, I assume previous knowledge of what the sauce looks like is very important. Also the ingredients used, especially the bread, which is very variable through different locations and type of flour and method.
I completely agree with that. It's yeah, that's also what I said. Oh, well, I edited that out, but that I actually wanted the chef standing next to me telling me what to do, or at least having some knowledge of what it should be. Yeah, that's really helpful, knowing what you're doing, or at least what you're aiming to create. Yeah.
And I agree with Merit too. It reminds me of the notion that I spoke about in my paper a couple of days ago about the apprenticeship and just the simple proximity to a master. As Merit says, she wishes she just had a chef beside her to ask. And you know, a lot of modern culinary training, it just simply won't prepare you to make these. So you just have to kind of throw yourself into it at some point. It also makes me think of the difficulty of moving from maybe what someone was cooking in the public sphere to a textual recipe. We sometimes maybe think that the cookbook authors had the easy job, but they somehow had to capture this as well. So it's interesting to think about the different perspectives and just reflect on the different avenues that you can follow with what looks like a finite recipe.
The next question is from Ashabet Koch concerning the camelina sauce. As far as I know, its name was related to camel by some researchers, meaning that the sauce should be camel colored. Do you think the sauce should have more cinnamon and saffron than comfortable so as to give it that brownish yellow color? The garlic sauce, do you think it's possible that the raw garlic should cook further along with the milk and flour mixture?
That's it's an interesting question. The color is an interesting question because Merit chose white wine, I believe, and I chose a Merlot or red wine. And so I probably myself, if someone said I have to change the color of the sauce, I would do it through the liquids more than the spice, because I think in medieval cuisine, there are a lot of spices listed. I'm not sure though that things tasted like hot, spicy, or super strong of spice. So that's kind of one thing where, although they use a lot of spice, how much of in what proportion were they actually using it in the recipes? So my gut reaction would be to go to the liquids if I'm looking to change the color.
Yes, same here. I was also contemplating the choice of bread, but well, knowing that my sauce was just soaked bread, the color might have been changed if I used like a brown bread or dark brown bread. But I would also think that first the color of the wine, or maybe the vinegar or verjus, that would change the color of the sauce. And of course, you can always add more cinnamon or saffron to change the color. But I think, well, of course, not knowing what the taste they preferred was like, you might need to pretty overpower your sauce to get that certain color. And also within archaeology, there is now more and more attention being paid to the senses. So also the room you are dining in, so candlelight or daylight or whatever, something like that would also have influence on what you would see. Of course, when you serve the sauce in a dark room, you don't see anything, but that's also something to keep in mind. And those senses, like not only taste and smell, but also visual senses, that is something very interesting that would need more research, but it's also very, well, everyone has a different vision about what that would be like. So it's very personal, but really interesting.
I also have remarks in the question by Alan Greco. One of the most popular 14th century spice mixtures in Italy was Spezia Camelline, which was used to make the salsa camelina, a kind of prepared spice mixture. Would that be on any interest to you? And also the salsa camelina was often bought from the apothecaries, so probably was then heated up and served.
Yes, so what Ryan talked about a few days ago about the cooks and the tradesmen that prepare dishes to be taken home bought, that's really interesting. And as an archaeobotanist, I do love mentioning of mixtures because I never know when my archaeobotanical finds are meant to be together or just independent ingredients. So I would be very interested in that, but maybe Ryan could tell more about,
I'm certainly interested in it, and also the question of whether it was hot or cold, because I didn't realize going into this that I just assumed it was heated and served kind of, slightly above room temperature, not super hot. I think Merritt interpreted it as a cold sauce. And it just simply didn't even cross our minds to talk about. We had a different starting place. But that is kind of a difficulty, both when you're cooking the sauce, it didn't mention heating it, but also serving the sauce. Is it hot or cold? More like a dip, maybe more room temperature, or more hot, like something that you put on with a ladle. So it's also a question for us, I guess.
I have another question by Cécile Chevalier. As for the second recipe, is boiling always to be taken literally? Having tried multiple times to obtain boiling liquids on campfires, it can be hard, maybe easier in a fireplace. May boiling have rather been used with the meaning of cook it on a hot fire in liquid? What kind of meal goes with that second sauce? I had never heard of it. How appetizing. Is it explicitly meant to be served with chicken?
Well, from experience, I also know that it takes quite some time to boil a liquid when you're having an open fire, especially if you use a recreated earthenware pot. When you get it to a boil, it stays a long time, but to get it there, it takes a really long time. So, cooking, of course, was just a day task for many people in the past. So I just, easily, because I have either a kettle or just the stove, so I assume boiling is boiling. But in many cultures, boiling is also just heating to a certain point, not specifically 100 degrees or something like that. And I just used plain flour for the second sauce, and eventually served it with cod. And it was nice. Bit garlicky, but tasty.
Yeah, I agree with Merritt as well that boiling probably just meant, there's bubbles in it somehow and heat. Whether it's a rolling boil, just from memory, I don't remember seeing medieval cookbooks say to simmer or kind of making differences between the type of boiling. So yeah, I do think that is probably what they meant by it. And it sounds like Bruno might know more about what the sauce was commonly eaten with. chicken was accessible, so I grabbed it. It wasn't linked in any way to chicken specifically. It probably would taste a bit better on fish, actually, but beef or pork, definitely not. And chicken, it was a little questionable, but yeah.
I think we have time for the last question from Helmut, and then we have to close up.
Yes, thank you. I've got a list of points here which I noted down during the session, but I will keep myself short. What I really loved was how Ryan introduced the session with the mentioning of the different outcomes. We have experienced this in our cooking classes we have here. We have about 3 different cooking classes with medieval recipes. And each time, and we have 10 participants each, and each time the sauces or whatever we cook tastes differently. It's really fascinating, but in the end it's eatable. So where's the problem? So this brings me to the question, Merit, you had, what should it look like, or what should you aim at? I think for the modern recreation, it is a question of what do you want to achieve. If you want to do experimental archaeology, you probably shouldn't cook it in your kitchen, but you should go outside and use all the old cooking tools, all the oldest cooking tools you can find. But if you're doing home cooking, cook it as you would like it. So there's no border to that. Yeah, and what your videos clearly showed is that the medieval texts are meant for professionals. So they are aimed at people who somehow knew how to get there, what is in the title. But it's a real proof of the concept, I think. The other thing is the question for proportion. To my understanding, sauces were had great influence in dietetics. So they were used to work with the food in order to bring it in a certain humoral balance. So it's probably, one should probably look there for the proportions. But generally, if you cook a sauce, you have a hot sauce in a humoral sense, which you then maybe eat to a cold dish like the fish, which would underline what Ryan said with the sauce cameline and the fish. Yeah, and the last point about the cooking techniques. We have been reading our 5,000 recipes here in Graz, most of them more than once. And we have a list of about, I think, 250 different expressions for cooking techniques, which ranges from simmering to deep frying, over roasting, pan roasting, and stuff like that. So there really is. So you really should look for differentiation here, but you probably only can read it if you have the background of let's say 5,000 recipes. But all in all, thank you very much. I loved the demonstrations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do have to say that the early modern recipes that I study, they are, well, more explicit in putting it over a fire, close to the fire, over a medium heat or a roaring fire, and also more specifically mentioning that it should have a rolling boil or something like that. So just not reading that the sauce that it should be cooked or boiled, I thought, okay, then it's a cold sauce. But yeah, it's really that the cook knew what to do, and I would be just an apprentice, just I think for the first weeks not be able to or allowed near the fire, just looking and giving the ingredients. So yeah, it was very informative, and having the bigger picture, more recipes, know the sort of the tradition in which it is written, that will be very helpful.
Yes, I completely agree. And Hamad makes such interesting and pertinent observations. And in fact, if I could maybe conclude this session, because I think our time is coming up, I'd like to refer to something Hamad said. And this is actually one of the reasons that we did this session, or it was one of my motivations, which was to move beyond our concerns about proportions or methods or what have you, and to kind of embrace that as part of the uniqueness and challenge with medieval cuisine. As a chef, and even when I teach at the university food history course, I do bring the students back to the culinary school, and we do make sauces or roasts or other things from not necessarily medieval, they might be from different parts of history. And there can be concern about, did I do it correctly? Have I done this? Did I use cloves or nutmeg? But ultimately, it's an incredibly valuable learning experience. There's honesty in being confronted with the ingredients and having to work through them. And I do think it's awesome if other scholars embrace it and include more practical cooking in their courses if they're interested. And that it's okay, you know, if one sauce is different from the other. And maybe to conclude on a point that I opened with, it is that even with our modern sauces in standardized recipe formats, when we have 20 students making these sauces, you know, whether it's bechamel or anything, the result is 20 different bechamels that taste different, are different consistencies. And so we actually still have that variation in our cuisine today, even though we have relatively finite recipes. And I think that if we work from that variation that's still present in our own cooking, it might help us kind of open the door to feeling a lot more comfortable exploring more medieval cuisine. And if Merit has anything to add?
Well, no, actually, I think you summed that up pretty perfectly. It was inspiring for me to start this demonstration, and yeah, I found it really interesting to be made aware of how I think and how I act and how I read, if I take it literally sometimes or just do what I think is best. It's very informative to study a recipe knowing what you're actually doing or being made aware of it. So I would like to thank Ryan for making this possible together with me, and of course the organization. And for those who would like to recreate the sauces, the session was recorded, so you can start this weekend and upload your own video of your culinary experience, I would say. Yes, thank you all very much for attending, and have a great evening or day, depending on what time of the day it is for you.
Thank you everyone for attending, and a huge thank you to the organizers for their work in this conference. It's been amazing. Thank you.